Ace Atkins has two new historical true crime novels. Devil's Garden is the story of a genuine celebrity, the movie star Fatty Arbuckle, and the trial ruined forever. And Infamous tells the story of George Machine Gun Kelly, the only Deep South 30s gangster, and his wife, Catherine, who craved celebrity so much she was almost willing to get caught to get it. I spoke with Ace Atkins at the Alabama Booksmith in Homewood, Alabama. Ace, it's good to see you again.
It's great to be here again.
We talked now a couple years ago in Monroeville, and at that time you had published the Phoenix City story, Wicked City, and you were in the middle of, or no, you were near the end of working on Devil's Garden, which has come out and been a success, but you and I have never had a chance to talk about it. Devil's Garden is the Fatty Arbuckle story. Everything I thought I knew about him was wrong. It turns out.
Well, I mean, I think what I had thought had happened in that story was completely different than I had been told and what the legend had led me to believe.
He was arrested for murder.
Yes.
But he didn't do it?
Well, I don't think that he did. And he was exonerated. He went through 3 trials and he was acquitted of all crimes. And the very idea that this case even went to trial was just ludicrous. There was no evidence against him. There was no physical evidence. There were no witnesses. There was just nothing. But it was the first time that we had ever had basically trial by media. And it was the first time you had a movie star at the center of a scandal. Now, it's commonplace. We see it in People magazine every week. But at that time, that was a fairly new deal. He was one of the first film stars ever to be embroiled in a scandal. But it's my belief, and from the research that I did, that he had nothing to do with this woman's death whatsoever. He just got wrapped up in this avalanche of media that was going on.
Was it just bad luck, or were there people who meant to get him? Was he the victim of a conspiracy, so to speak?
I don't necessarily think he was a victim of a conspiracy, but I do think he was an opportune target. And he was somebody that was loved the world over, and then all of a sudden he was absolutely vilified, he was despised, his films were burned. He was one of the biggest movie stars in Hollywood at that time. He was a beloved comic, kids adored him, and people banned him. He was immoral, he was trash, he was representative of everything that was bad in the film business. And what was interesting to me about this particular book is you see this American attitude that Arbuckle says. He says, the American public is more ardent in its hero worship than any other nation, but more ruthless about tearing down its idols. And you think about that with something today like the Tiger Woods scandal.
Exactly.
I mean, somebody like Tiger Woods, everybody loved, everyone adored. He was universally a hero to millions. And he gets involved in a domestic dispute, and he is put upon, he is vilified, he is a horrible person. And so we see this continually in the American public.
I've been thinking about this exact thing, the Tiger Woods thing. How could one not?
Yeah, of course.
But here's a question. It looked to me, I mean, poor old, by the way, how much did Fatty weigh?
He wasn't that big.
He wasn't that big.
He wasn't that big. He was a stout man. He was probably about 240 pounds. Kind of hefty guy, but he wasn't really fat. He was actually very athletic. He was somebody that showed a tremendous amount of prowess in his pratfalls and his physical ability as far as doing these comic stunts. But he wore the big pants, and he always wore a very little hat. And that was his character. But to his friends and to people in the business, he was a very shrewd businessman. He was Roscoe Arbuckle.
Yeah. All right, he was thoroughly beloved by children and adults. Everybody thought he was just marvelous. He gets arrested. He's tried 3 times.
3 times. Yeah.
And he is found not guilty.
Right.
All right. And his career he is not redeemed. He is not resuscitated.
There's no Nike commercial for Fatty Arbuckle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now here's a question. It's not a literary question. It's sort of a cultural question.
Right.
Now people seem to get redeemed. No?
Sometimes, maybe. But with Arbuckle, he really became the scapegoat. And even though he was acquitted of these charges, there were 2 hung juries, And finally, he got one for acquittal. At that point, there was something they just started, which was called the Hayes Commission. And the Hayes Commission was a way, I don't want to get involved in too much of the backstory in that, but basically it's what we have now as far as our rating system. It's a way of the motion picture industry from setting up their own standards as opposed to every film across the country getting censored by each market. It's a way of policing themselves. And the first act that they did when Will Hayes took over that commission in 1922 was to ban Roscoe Arbuckle for life from film.
Well, I loved his car.
Real story, the Pierce Arrow, very famous, yeah.
The back seat was a stretch limo in its time.
Of course,
with all the accoutrements.
A bar and a toilet.
A toilet.
You never have to leave the. You never have to leave the
toilet
car.
in an auto.
Exactly.
We don't have that anymore.
No, but you should. We should.
My feeling is that now people get rehabilitated, but.
Well, what would happen to Roscoe Arbuckle today? Again, one of the reasons I wanted to write this book and the reason why I love the Arbuckle story is we're seeing it play out time and again and again and again. The way we worship pop culture figures, and the way we believe it's our job to put upon them our own value system and see who they are. But I think now today, what would happen to Arbuckle is he would go to rehab. And he would go to rehab. That seems to be the new thing for celebrities. He would come out and then he would be accepted. So you have to go to rehab first.
And he could be on television a lot now.
He could have his own reality show.
That's right. He could have, and also he'd give press conferences.
Sure, of course.
Explain to people what a new man he was.
Absolutely.
Well, that's 2 years ago. Now you have a brand new book, Infamous.
Yeah.
And it's about the man that we think we know something about, named George Machine Gun Kelly, and his wife Catherine, who grows in this book until she sort of takes it over.
Just like in real life.
Kelly, the thing about Kelly that just struck me more than anything else is he's our only bona fide Deep South gangster.
Absolutely.
Where is he from? Where was Catherine from?
He's from Memphis, Tennessee. He went to high school, went to grade school, high school in Memphis. Came from a pretty decent family. He was born George Barnes around the turn of the century, and his wife was born Cleo Brooks in Saltillo, Mississippi, which is a very rural farming community. And she ended up becoming a gangster's moll and a very stylish woman and reinventing herself the way you can in America as the stylish Catherine Kelly.
Now you've left out a very important part of Machine Gun Kelly's upbringing. He was a college boy.
He was. In fact, that was the two things, three things really, is that he was born in the South, or he was raised in the South, and the fact that he attended college, and he came from a fairly good family. And that's not what you expect from the Depression-era criminal.
No.
Nobody went to college.
No.
Even if it was one semester at Mississippi State.
Well, they aren't going to put any plaques or statues up for George over at Mississippi State.
No, I don't think they're going to have any plaques or any kind of mementos up to George Kelly. But he was, as the story goes, he was his best grade was in personal hygiene, which was a C. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but that's the story. And of course, when being at Ole Miss and in Oxford, anytime that I say that the gangster George Kelly attended Mississippi State, they all love that.
Oh, it doesn't have to be true. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it's true. But he did go to State. That is absolutely true. Yeah.
He did. And he was a bank robber.
He was a bootlegger before he was a bank robber.
Yes.
And he started off in Memphis, actually in high school. I mean, he was this is getting right to the point where Prohibition is passed, and he starts off and he's bootlegging, moonshine, that kind of thing, and then he moves up and he's working places like the Peabody Hotel and the Chiska Hotel, and he's the kind of guy that'd come in a raincoat and he'd walk over to one of the rooms and make money that way, doing very well. And that business is what brought him out to Texas. That's what brought him out to Oklahoma. And it's in the late 1920s that he gets arrested for selling whiskey on an Indian reservation outside Tulsa. And that event is what changed his life. Here goes George Kelly, basically the black sheep of a decently wealthy family, not a very wealthy family, but a good family in Memphis. And he gets put in Leavenworth. And here he's in with these real criminals. Mm-hmm. These are not bootleggers. I mean, being a bootlegger is pretty commonplace during Prohibition. And he comes in contact with men like Harvey Bailey. And one of the reasons why most people don't know Harvey Bailey is a famous bank robber is because he was so good he was almost never caught. Mm-hmm. And he meets people like Vern Miller and Jelly Nash, and this provides his education. While he's in jail, he learns how to rob banks. And when he gets out, the first places he goes, St. Paul, Minnesota. That's the core of the criminal underworld in the United States at that time. And he starts making connections and robbing banks.
And bank robbing became less and less fashionable because because the banks didn't have very much money in them, or
yeah, I mean, what happened? These poor criminals, these guys. I mean, God bless somebody like George Kelly. He gets into Prohibition, and during Prohibition, and becoming a bootlegger. And what happens? I mean, Prohibition ends.
They repeal.
So it's repealed. So what's going to happen? So then he goes to bank robbing, and then the damn Great Depression happens. There's no money in the bank. So what are you going to do? And that's where he turns to kidnapping, and that's in 1933, and that's when he decides, because that he knows he can target somebody who actually has the money.
Is there a cultural underpinning? Is the Lindbergh baby kidnapping such a big deal that, in a sense, not copycat, because they obviously he kidnaps a grown man,
sure, and there was a reason for that.
But do you think that as a cultural event that the Lindbergh kidnapping had a huge effect on this kind of thing?
Well, the one thing it did do is it made kidnapping not as popular with the masses. I mean, when you kidnap a guy like Charlie Urschel, who was a wealthy oil man, he was
right.
somebody that the masses probably would not have a lot of sympathy for, being
right.
a wealthy oil man during the Great Depression. But that's why they chose him, because the Lindbergh case soured public opinion so much it almost guaranteed a death penalty if you ended up kidnapping a child. And but kidnappings at this point, before the Lindbergh kidnapping, after the Lindbergh kidnapping, were very popular. And in fact, it was such a big crime that Newsweek magazine, in the back of Newsweek, ran an entire section just of the kidnappings of the week. So the Urschel thing was not that unusual. But to go for a child after the Lindbergh child had died, that was something that nobody wanted to touch.
I had no idea it was a common crime. I thought it was sort of invented in the 30s.
It was during the 30s,
yeah.
during the Depression. To target a wealthy individual and kidnap them and hold them for ransom was extremely common. In fact, Urschel was maybe one of 15 or 20 from that month.
Early in your book, there's a shootout in Kansas City between the Kansas City Railroad Station. They have a criminal, and they're transporting him to jail. But there's a big shootout, and the one of the good guys is this ex-Texas Ranger named Gus, Gus Jones,
yeah.
And he's the real thing.
Yeah.
But when the good guys get in the fight with the bad guys have the heavy artillery.
Yeah, they do. They're out. They're definitely outgunned. I mean,
how is that allowed to happen?
Well, the FBI really wasn't the FBI at that point. If we talk about the FBI, or I'll probably mention the FBI during the course of this interview, but really it was still the Justice Department. It had not become what Hoover wanted it to become. This is a very fledgling agency. It had been around for a while, but as far as having a federal police force, this was a very controversial issue. This was kind of the healthcare issue of its day. People were talking about a federal police force in the same way as, we have federal cops that's just like Mussolini. That's like Hitler. This is not the type of government we have. We do not want somebody watching what we're doing. This was a very hot debate. So the idea of federal agents carrying weapons at this time was not something that had been approved yet. So federal agents were not even supposed to carry guns. They did carry guns in some instances, but certainly not the kind of firepower that gangsters were wielding, Thompson machine guns, BARs, those kind of things.
Am I right to think that as the 20th century moved along, right up until, say, 5 years ago, that the bad guys in America have always had better weapons than the good guys?
Yeah, we really should make sure that we have better equipment. But yeah, it does seem like that they always are better equipped maybe than the good guys.
Well,
it doesn't quite seem fair.
The kidnapping is conducted, and miraculously the ransom is delivered, and miraculously George gets the money, and then
right.
He and Catherine get this big bag full of money, and there's a lot of plot that goes along with this.
But they pull it off.
They do pull it off.
Yeah, they pull it off. Despite all the problems they have and everything, they do it right. They get the money.
I was struck with the juvenile nature of George and Catherine, the absolute childishness of it. They have $200,000.
Yeah.
And how do they spend it?
hanging out in hotel rooms, ordering room service, having a great time, ordering up drinks, and that's where the first thing they do.
This is what frat boys do.
That's a very good point, because that's really the way that I always imagined George Kelly. George Kelly was not a sociopath like Babyface Nelson. No. He wasn't a super bank robber in the way Dillinger was. He really was kind of like that, just good old frat boy that you'd see probably at half the bars in downtown Birmingham, and never killed anybody. And he didn't have a plan. He pulled one of the largest kidnappings off in U.S. history, but after that, didn't really know what comes next.
He may not have had a plan, but he sure had a wife.
Sure.
What about her?
Well, she dominates the book, and she dominated George in real life.
Yes.
And when I started writing a novel about George Kelly, about Machine Gun Kelly, and about his story, it was only natural that Catherine Kelly would bump him out of the way, and she would become the dominant figure, because she was a very powerful personality. As I mentioned earlier, she was born Cleo Brooks in Little Saltillo, Mississippi.
Right.
She moves out west to the southwest. She becomes Catherine, and she becomes very stylish. She wears very nice clothes. She has her hair done perfectly, great jewelry, and she's now like a movie star.
She is beautiful and sexy, yes.
She is beautiful and sexy.
Yeah.
And so I'm not saying all men, but occasionally men can be led astray by beautiful women. It has happened before. I know this is news to you, but it has happened.
And what was it that J. Edgar Hoover said about their marriage?
Well, I think J. Edgar Hoover, first of all, was probably very jealous of her wardrobe. I think that's probably how that started. Saw those gorgeous dresses she was wearing, quite envious of it. But he called George Kelly maybe the most henpecked man in America. And I think that's dead on.
And the most inept criminal of his time.
And the most inept criminal.
Well, I know this is ridiculous, but when Catherine left their hotel suite to go shopping, she often bought underwear.
Yeah.
Quantities, masses of it. Dresses, stockings,
sure.
Underwear.
Well, the story, which is absolutely true, is when they finally caught George and Catherine, and they had been on the run for nearly 3 months. They had covered over 20,000 miles. Their journey had crisscrossed America. In fact, I'm on book tour now, and it's like almost every city I go to has a Machine Gun Kelly connection. He has been all these places, and he was just worn out. But when they finally corner them in Memphis at this little house where they're staying, they're holed up because they can't go anywhere. They're the most famous couple in America. This is before Bonnie and Clyde, before Dillinger, before he is the first major public enemy. And they arrest him, and Catherine walks out. She tells the Memphis police, she said, okay, I'm coming with you, but I need some time to get ready first. And she goes in, and she takes over 30 minutes. And the Memphis police just sit there and wait for her to come out. And she's wearing this very nice dress, very nice jewelry. She's perfectly done. So that explains a lot about her.
She was intoxicated with what we would now call pop culture, with cinema, with movie culture.
Sure. And I think a lot of people were. I mean, in the early 1930s, I mean, we're still adjusting to the novelty. I mean, there has been film, but we're moving into a much more powerful form of film. I mean, we're not in the silent film era anymore. We are talking about those Busby Berkeley musicals. We're talking about Gold Diggers of 33 and Barbara Stanwyck, and I think
glamour.
And it made a massive impact on the American psyche. And there are movie star magazines, and people want to look like the movie stars. Yes. They want to be the movie stars. So movie stars have stopped being just actors, and they have crossed over in the public consciousness.
Well, here's what I think of as a beautiful contradiction. Catherine complains bitterly to George that they're not as famous as she'd like for them to be.
Yeah.
But the more famous they get, the less they can actually go out to restaurants or nightclubs or anywhere else.
That's the trade-off.
So they're holed up in this hotel suite, even if it is the presidential suite.
But it gets so bad they can't even check into a hotel. I mean, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And even though they have the money, they have the notoriety, they have everything, they finally go and they're staying with a guy who's guy's got an injured leg, who's a parking attendant at the Peabody Hotel, and they're staying at his bungalow down in South Memphis. And that's the only place they can stay. Yeah. That's the only place they can have them. They can't evade the law. They're cornered. But she is better than famous. She is infamous.
Yes, she wants to be.
She wants to be.
Right, we don't want to bring Dostoevsky into this, but
well, why not? Let's bring him in.
No, I've done it already. It's too late. Did Did she want to be caught? Not merely want to be famous, but want to be caught, because if she weren't caught.
I don't think so.
No.
I don't think Catherine wanted to be caught. I do very much believe that George wanted to be caught. I think that these people were absolutely worn out. They had, again, covered so much mileage. They had stayed in so many hotels. They had gone everywhere. They had been up to Chicago. They'd been in Des Moines, St. Paul, down in Texas, everywhere. And George's response to the police when they came in, and again, I think this is why George Kelly is not traditionally the one that you see in the movies, and because he's not the classic bloody bullets death scene that you expect at the end of a gangster picture. He gives up and he quits, and he tells the cops that arrest him, he said, "I've been waiting for you all night." And he was tired. He wanted to come in. I think Catherine just wasn't sure what to do. I think she was just physically exhausted, but I don't think she wanted to be caught. But when she was caught, she was very, very good about mugging for the cameras.
Sure.
Yeah,
Well, that was her moment, wasn't it?
Sure, of course.
Which would not have come had she not been caught.
Yes.
All these gangsters, and this goes on in contemporary America as well as 1933 America.
Yeah.
There's always this talk. We've got this big score. We'll go to Bolivia. We'll go to Mexico. We'll even go to Canada. My own belief is that they couldn't imagine going to Europe because they were hicks, and
Right.
the idea of going to France would overwhelm them. But they could imagine Mexico. But
Sure.
nobody ever does it. They had $200,000. They could have lived the rest of their lives in comfort anywhere else, but they don't go.
And they should have gone.
Why
And-
didn't they go?
Well, there are two reasons. George and Catherine, they're having a lot of fun in the first few weeks. They're having a ball,
Yeah.
and everything's going good. And their idea is this went so well. They have the money.
Yeah.
If they do it 5 more times, they can get $1 million, and $1 million is going to be a heck of a lot better than 200 grand. And you can imagine 1933, this is a considerable amount of money. But the real problem when they did start having a discussion, especially when the federal agents started coming in on them about leaving, maybe going to Cuba, maybe going to South
Yeah,
America,
yeah.
doing something like that, what happened was the FBI tracked Catherine's mother and labeled her and charged her as being an accomplice to the kidnapping. And when she was arrested and her face was put across papers all over America, it incensed Catherine, and she wanted George to go rescue his mother-in-law. And that's what happened. I mean, if he had not gone back and tried to rescue the mother-in-law, and if they had not returned to Texas, they probably would have pulled everything off.
I do not believe that they had the intellectual wherewithal to go live in a foreign country, but
Maybe, I think George maybe one of them could have figured it out.
since you left the
Nick Travers.
Nick Travers
Right.
series.
You're thinking about Travis McGee.
No.
Yeah.
Well, I hope not.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, that's a good comparison, I'll take.
Yeah. But the Nick Travers, there were a few of those, and since then, there's been infamous Devil's Garden before that, White Shadow before that. These historical standalone mysteries are doing very, very well, and I'm sure you have the next one underway. What is it?
Well, I'm going to take a rest from the truth-based books for a little bit, and I really want to do a contemporary novel.
Oh.
And these books are a tremendous, tremendous amount of work. It's a big undertaking. To take over a story like Infamous is 8,000 pages of FBI records. A story like Wicked City on Phoenix City, Alabama, again, thousands and thousands of pages to wade through, firsthand interviews. I mean, it is a lot of work. And so I thought, I'd really like to do a contemporary this time, and do something that I had thought about a lot, which is, in Mississippi, I keep on seeing these soldiers returning home from the front and coming in from Afghanistan, coming in from Iraq, and trying to settle into a normal life and trying to make a go of things.
I see.
In a world that is probably quite a shock to them. And so I am working on a book, and it is a crime novel. It is a contemporary novel, but it addresses the idea of soldiers coming home, which is kind of echoing a lot of literature that came out, obviously, after World War II and after, after any time there's...
Well,
there's
you won't have to go look up what people had for lunch and what movie was playing at the
No,
local theater.
No, in fact, for this book, I actually chose to write this first book. I'm about 70% into it, and I've decided to set it right around my house.
Good.
So no trips to look at old newspapers. I don't have to make sure the details on the clothes are correct. I know these people, and I know this world, and so it's been a fun project and a relaxing project. And I know at one point I'm going to go back and tell another true story. I've got other true stories that are on the back burner, but for right now, I'm going to write a couple of contemporaries and take a little break.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a fan, and I'm looking forward to them.
Well, wonderful.
If you write them, I'll read them, and then we'll talk about them.
Well, that's wonderful. That's what I like to hear.
Thank you very much. This has been a pleasure.
Mine too.
To order this season of Bookmark on DVD, call 1-800-463-8825. Additional information can be found on our website at www.alabamatv.org.